interesting articles. Yes, there are really lots of interesting articles. Okay, now, friends, I will talk about community studies in Turkey, town and city studies in relationship to inequality, social stratification, class structure of Turkey. Now, I will try to understand social stratification, class structure, stratificational and class cleavages between groups, classes, groups, parties in Turkey, the structural underlying factors that are related to these stratificational structures, and then to the attitudinal and behavioral practices, attitudinal positions and behavior practices. So I will do this in 2 weeks. In the first week, I'm trying to go into 2 studies by Mübeccel Kıray, 2 studies. One on the Black Sea coast, on Ereğli, and another in the Aegean, Izmir. 2 cities, one small, one a metropolis, that is carried out, the research carried out by Mübeccel Kıray. And then again, I will report about 2 towns or cities, research about 2 towns and cities, and stratification and attitudes and practices in those 2 cities on the basis of research carried out in 2 cities by Bahattin Akşit. So this is the first week. Now, the following week, I am going to report 2 PhD theses of my students. One, already she is a professor, but she did her PhD research with me. I was her advisor on Kırıkkale, Hayriye Erbaş. So I will discuss her work on, again, classes, strata, inequality in Kırıkkale and Ankara. In Kırıkkale, an industrial city and the capital of Turkey. That is the first one. Second one, actually three PhD theses in the second week. Second one is by Mehmet Erbaş, Hayriye Erbaş and Mehmet Erbaş. Both of them were my students. Mehmet did a study in a town, and Mehmet, he found out something about nativism and migrants versus natives, city natives, or town natives of the town, native residents of the town, and migrant residents of the town, and the clash between them. Okay, now, and the third one is about, again, social stratification and culture and religion, relationship between culture, religion, and social stratification in Istanbul. And this is, again, a student of mine, Didem Yemeniciler, did the study last few years from 2018 to 2021. In those 3 years, she did this study, and there are interesting findings. So I will discuss these 3 PhD theses in the second week. Now I will discuss this week Mübeccel Kıray's 2 research on 2 cities and my MA thesis and PhD thesis, again about 2 middle-sized cities. Okay, now let me start with Mübeccel Kıray. Now, those of you who are taking my Turkish sociologists class or development of sociology in Turkey, I have shown this book there. Let me show it to you. Do you see this? I think you do. As you can see, I bought this book when I was first year in Middle East Technical University, and this book caused me to enter into entrance exam again and leave engineering and go to sociology. This book, this Ereğli book, this research, I found it so interesting. You know, I was thinking engineering, physics, and sociology. This was the sociology part. So how Mübeccel Kıray used a town as I was thinking as a physicist laboratories like CERN. You know, there is CERN in Switzerland, CERN. I think between the border between Italy and Switzerland, you know, a big neutron hydron or something like that. I said, no, where will I find those kinds of laboratories? So here it is. Towns are laboratories for sociologists, so I should be a sociologist. So I entered the exam again, and I am a sociologist. Here I am in front of you. Okay, now, and let me report about this book. Okay, now, let me make it concrete. Let me again share the content of the book, and then I will focus on 2 chapters of the book, which are about stratification, consumption, occupations, classes, inequality, the relationships between different groups. I will go into that. Now, again, let me go here. Let me go here, yes, and then share my screen. Share my screen, and now Ereğli. This one. Here it is. Okay, now here, I'm sorry, it is in Turkish, the book. Now I have this one, the content of this book now. This is the electronic version of it. Okay, now in the first chapter, bölüm 1, first chapter, the problem, introduction, the problem, you know, she poses the problem. What is her problem? Her problem is to study a town, an old town actually, you know, which was a town where the population of the town and of the town and of the villages around the town were working in the coal mining. You know, this town is close to Zonguldak. Zonguldak mining, you know, mining industry, mining, coal mining in Zonguldak and Ereğli in this region is from 19th century to the present, and many people work there, especially peasants from the villages, were in the coal mining fields for 1 month, and then they were resting in their villages for 1 month. You know, that type. And of course, there were people also from the town. But now a heavy industry is going to be established in Ereğli. So the problem that Mübeccel Kıray poses for this research is to find out, to describe and analyze the social structure, social occupational structure, attitudinal structure, population structure, commercial economic structure, as we will see now, before the establishment of heavy industry. Because as the heavy industry is going to be established, the town will be transformed. Now, you know, this research was in 1961, 62, 63, around that time, and the book is published in 1964. So in the introduction, the problem is posed, and this is the problem. And then, and then in the second chapter, you know, theses are like this too. There are, she's talking about the sources of the data. So there are already written historical materials, but for a sociologist, historical materials are not enough, you know. So she conducted interviews, as you learned in your second year, qualitative methods, and also she did a survey, quantitative survey, questionnaire. She constructed that questionnaire and administered the questionnaire into a sample. Okay, now, she talked about this methodological framework in the second chapter. In the third chapter, she goes into the history of Ereğli. You know, I will not go into those. And in the fourth chapter, she goes into transportation and communication. And in the fifth chapter, she goes into population movements, migrations, travels, and whether there are foreigners in the town or not. Now, 6th and 7th chapters are the chapters I will focus. Okay. Now it is called socioeconomic life in Ereğli. It starts with occupations, and then she goes into peasant-merchant relationship, or patronage relationships, patron-client relationships. You know, it's a class relationship actually, and then she goes into again historical. She develops a historical perspective for the class and for stratificational structure of the town, for the class and stratificational structure of the town. And then she goes into mobility, occupational mobility, and then she goes into attitudes, for example, attitudes towards women's work, whether women can work in the public workplaces. And chapter 7 is about income, you know, economic structure and consumption norms. So she goes into inputs and outputs, income and consumption, spending, income and spending, and how these consumption norms are being transformed or not, what the conceptions of luxury and spending aimlessly. And then chapter 8 is about family structure, mother-son relationships, father-son relationship, girl-daughter and mother and father relationships, wife and husband relationship. Yeah, she goes into all these. And then she goes into educational institutions, chapter 9. Chapter 10, leisure time, leisure. What are the leisure for women and for man, and man and woman together, what kind of leisure activities they do. And then communication, radio, newspapers, cinema, and conceptions of time and distance, you know, to what extent it's traditional and to what extent it is modern. And then she goes into the administrative structure. And then chapter 13 is about religion and worldview. So she goes into organized and formal religious life, and then folk beliefs and worldview. And then she goes into chapter 14, iron and steel factories, you know, the new factories that will be established. Already there are some people who started working there in the construction of the factories, and how new human relationships are emerging, and what kind of an image they have of the great Ereğli that is emerging, the larger Ereğli, not a town Ereğli, but now a city, or a large city Ereğli, you know, what kind of Ereğli they expect. And then chapter 15 is about the villages around the town, around Ereğli, and their educational, their income, their consumption norms, their villagers' leisure time activities, their communication, their religion, and the worldview, and their relationship with factories. Okay. Now, as I said, I will not go into all these. You know, it will take all my time, but I will go into mostly chapter 6 and chapter 7. But here, I will not go into much detail, of course, but now, Kıray has an social change perspective while studying a town like Ereğli. Now, this social change perspective is something like this. Actually, it's a modernization perspective, or it is an urbanization, industrialization perspective. Now, sociologists during 1960s and 50s in third world countries like Turkey are looking into the position of the country in the world system. You see, now in the world system, world capitalist system, world economic system, they are underdeveloped. Okay, they are underdeveloped, and they have to develop. They have to industrialize. They have to depeasantize the agricultural or the peasant sector, which already during 1950s and 60s, there's a mass migration from the villages to the cities, and some kind of industrialization. You know, we discussed import substitution, industrialization in previous weeks. You know, there are those kinds of developments. Now, Mübeccel Kıray is focusing like into a community, the Ereğli, the community in Ereğli. There's a city here with something like 10, 15. You know, the towns usually at that time are around 10, 15,000 20,000, 25,000, around that. You know, there are larger ones and smaller ones, but towns are like that. Now, this is a community. But already this community, Ereğli community, is being transformed with some modern economic intrusion of coal mining into the town and into the villages of this town. So it is already being in the process. Is already in the process of change, and in this process of change, what kind of groups are emerging and establishing a relationship with each other in such a way that the balance in the community is not disturbed. You know, it is not totally anomic or totally disorganized. Now, she has this perspective. This is actually a functionalist, structural functionalist kind of perspective, or also it is a Marxist perspective as well, that all communities, all societies, if they are surviving, they have to be integrated. They have to, the parts, some parts might change, other parts might not change, but the changing parts and non-changing parts, or the slow changing parts, or slow changing institutions and fast changing institutions, structures, should have a balance in such a way that the society will not be, or the community will not be disorganized, into a chaos. No community can survive in chaos, in complete anomy. There might be some form of anomy can be tolerated, but a complete anomy or normlessness, structurelessness cannot be tolerated. People cannot survive under those conditions. So she's looking for what kind of relationships are being established. Now here you have to remember from your second year, Durkheim. Now, in Durkheim's perspective of change, if you remember, there was a change from mechanical solidarity type of communities to organic solidarity type of societies. From communities, Gemeinschaft, to Gesellschaft, Tönnies or Durkheim's. Now, Gesellschaft or mechanical solidarity, no, organic solidarity of Gesellschaft, of society, whereas community is mechanically solidary, whereas modern societies are organically solidary. And organic solidarity is kept with division of labor. More and more complex division of labor. New occupations, new professions, new classes emerging on the basis of differentiation of economic structures, differentiation of occupational structures, differentiation of organizational structures, and class structures, stratificational structure, differentiation. But these differentiated parts should be integrated. Differentiation and integration should go parallel to each other, but they don't usually. So Mübeccel Kıray invented this term, buffer institutions, tampon kurumlar, buffer institutions, and she studied peasant-merchant relationships or patron-client relationship between peasants and merchants as an example of buffer institution or intermediate institution. You know, she has a future society which is rationally organized with complex division of labor, where there are occupations, high level of specialization through education, university level, you know, occupational and academic type of educational institutions, you know, that will be a rationally organized modern society. But until that time, how this community society, which is a community being transformed from Gemeinschaft community to a society where rational division of labor will be organized, the society. But in between, now she conceptualizes Ereğli in between, and Turkey in between. Turkish social structure is in between. It is neither traditional. Even when she goes into the history, even in 19th century, you know, it is there is no complete traditional society, because during 18th century, as we discussed in the first semester, during 18th century, it started already transforming. During 19th century, you know, we discussed all those 1838, 1856, and 1876, you know, all those 19th century developments in Istanbul had its impact throughout Ottoman Empire and throughout Turkey, and then War of Liberation and establishment of the, you know, all these. So it is not anymore Gemeinschaft. It is not anymore a traditional community. It is not anymore a mechanically solidary tribes or villages. It is being transformed, but it is not yet a rationally organized with complex division of labor, with associational structures like in the West. Okay, like in the West, it is not there yet, but from Mübeccel Kıray's perspective, it is on the way there. And while going on the way, there is this buffer institutions, and peasant merchant relationship is a buffer institution. Now, why there is this peasant merchant relationship? Because the peasants, with their low level of education and limited knowledge of the modern world, they need somebody, a patron, kind of, you know, like in the traditional, they had their landlord, ağa, they had their ağa, and perhaps imam in the village, and then muhtar entered into the, you know, we discussed these, you know, the village law and muhtar and etc. You know, the committee of the elders, etc. But still, when they go to the city, to the town, they are related. They find a merchant whose shop contains everything that a peasant's family needs from birth to death. Everything in an unspecialized way. You know, Mübeccel Kıray described this in detail. You know, how these stores, these are stores, you know, they are not grocery stores, you know, it is not just grocery. Every kind of item exists there. You know, it is a kind of shopping mall, you know, but a shopping mall in one large floor, kind of one large floor, where everything is put around, everything that a peasant family needs, you know. So the peasant goes there into the store, whatever the need for that particular time, maybe salt or olive oil, or for lighting, gasoline, whatever, you know, petroleum, or if they are marrying their son, everything that their son needs for the wedding ceremony, or everything that daughter needs for the wedding of the daughter. And they buy this on veresiye alışveriş in Turkish. Now, there is no particular English for this, veresiye alışveriş. Now, they buy things, but they don't pay, you know? They don't pay. It is being recorded onto the notebook. The merchant, or if the merchant is a little bit big, organized, specialized, he might have hired a recorder, you know, to keep the record for every family, you know, what items they bought and what is the price. The price as he thinks fit, you know, the price, he determines the price, you know. The peasant has no say in terms of the price of what they buy. And then during summer, when they grow their cherries or tomatoes or raspberries or strawberry especially, they bring all their strawberry as they grow, and they pick to the merchant. And merchant also fix the price for the strawberry, let's say, or for the tomato, or whatever. And then already the peasant is in debt to the merchant. So now with the strawberry, now they have some income. So the merchant arranges, you know, how many kilos of strawberry will pay for the debt of that peasant. So there is a patronage relation, patron-client relationship. But this is not all. This is not all. The peasant is dependent on the patron, on the merchant, because merchant is not selling only items from his store, but also taking the peasant or the members of the family to the doctor, or to the lawyer, or to the educational institution, to all other relationships, you know, which should be, you know, an independent person, city person, will do all these, you know, will learn about them, will read information about them, and go and will do it themselves. But the peasants are dependent. Sometimes the all the households in one village are dependent on one merchant, you know. And so this is a class relationship, actually. This is also a buffer institution that keeps the balance. Now, of course, sometimes there are conflicts and cleavages here, and merchants become rich. They are rich, you know, in the stratificational structure. They are rich. Actually, in this chapter, when she compares the occupations of the father and occupations of the household heads whom she interviewed. Let me just go there. And she finds out that in the generation of the father, let me see, what was this? 83. Okay. Now let me find it from the book I have here with me. 82. Sorry. Here it is. Actually, here it is. Yes. Tahmilatçı. Yes. So, for example, in the father's occupations, if you look at the father's occupations, in the father's generation, 36% in the sample, and in the town, hopefully, this is a representative sample, 36% are merchants and traders, merchants and traders in the town. You know, so the main group, main class in the town of Ereğli are traders and merchants. Okay, merchants are larger, with larger capital. Trade, you know, there are with different amounts of capital, you know, and a heterogeneous group, but homogeneity is that they are all on the in the trade relationship with the peasants or with the workers. They are in the patron side, and peasants and workers are in the client side. Okay, 36%. Now the second group, of course, in the father's generation too, there is a bureaucracy in the town. So there are officers, bureaucrats in various administrative units of the governor. You know, in this case, it is kaymakamlık, you know, sub-governorship, and also army officers. You know, there is also a small unit in each town. So that is the second group. And no, the second group actually in father's generation are, although they are in the town, 21% of the fathers were farmers, although residing in the town or in the village. Now their sons, okay, they are in the town or in the village. They were peasants or farmers in the father's generation. Second largest group, 21%. So 36% merchants and traders, and 21% farmers, peasants. And third group is the bureaucrats and army officers, you know, bureaucracy. And then fourth group is professionals, professional like doctor and lawyer and etc. Now in in the second generation of the household, that's now whom actually the questionnaires are administered. Now this the percentages are again from 36% to 31% merchants and traders. Still 31%. Although there is some reduction. Why there is that reduction? Because the number of qualified workers and unqualified workers increased. Now it increased to 22%. Now 15% of this are qualified workers, and 8%, some 8% is unqualified workers as the second group. And then as the third group, 20%, almost close to 20%, are again bureaucrats, army or civil bureaucracy bureaucrats. As you can see from fathers' occupations, or not fathers, previous generation. No. He asked about the fathers of the household head. Household head can be women as well, but very few women are household heads, mostly men. So their occupations are merchants and traders, qualified and unqualified workers, and officers, military or civil officers, and now it increased to 7% professionals. In Turkish, it's called serbest meslek sahipleri, free occupation. Now, free occupation is self-occupied professionals. Also, traders are craftsmen, and traders are also self-employed, but these are university graduate self-employed occupations in that category. But here, this is an occupational categorization, in terms of percentages. But this is not a class relationship. This is not a stratification relationship. In order to talk about class relationship, there should be a hierarchy, a relationship, a conflict or a cooperation, but a relationship. So in this sense, merchant-peasant relationship is a good example for this. Now, I can go into further details. Really, this is there are very interesting results. When you go and do field research, and in this case, qualitative field research as well as quantitative survey research, there is so much data. And as I read to you the chapters of the book, there are what kind of trends in the direction of urbanization, etc., and how more and more secular and urban lifestyles will emerge. But this was the expectation of Mübeccel Kıray in the first Ereğli research. And then she did a second research in 1982. Now, what she found out was not what she expected. Yes, the heavy industry came. Yes, there was migration into the town, and it became a city, getting larger and larger. But instead of a rationally organized and with anonymous relationships, modern city, patron-client relationships continued. Instead of a secular, rational, modern city society, urban society, there was, yes, an urban society, but the workers there and other households, now they're not going to the merchants, but they were going to the religious leaders, tariqat, and the patron-client relationship now shifted from merchant-peasant or relationship to a religious guidance. So from point of view of Mübeccel Kıray, instead of developing their own rational approach and personality and deciding for themselves about what to do, now they are going to the religious leaders, sheikh, and asking, for advice. And now Mübeccel Kıray did not publish the findings of the second research in 1982. We think that because of this, she was not able. How is she going to interpret this? Now, in between 1982 and 1964 or 62, when the first research was done, and 20 years later, the second research, Nurvergin, another sociologist who did her PhD in France, did her PhD research in Ereğli, and she found out before actually Mübeccel Kıray this pattern-client relationship between the city people, workers, peasants, and other occupational members with the religious leaders, with the religious guides. And she thought that, that's a type of modernization that's normal for a country, for a society like Turkey. But from the point of view of Mübeccel Kıray's approach, that was problematic. So because of problematic issue, she couldn't bring herself to analyze all these variables. But then we asked her, why didn't she write, the results? She said that, there is much data, and she wasn't able to use like SPSS and other quantitative analysis programs, coding and analyzing them. Now, previously in 1962, from 1962 to 64, her husband, Ibrahim Kıray, who is a doctor, she actually thanks him in this book and in the next book that I am going to, and in all books actually. He was, as a doctor, he knew statistics, and he was doing the cross tabulations, quantitative analysis, and Mübeccel Kıray, as a sociologist, was interpreting them. Of course, she was telling him what kind of cross tabulations he can develop from the data from the questionnaire. But with a small sample, in a small city, that was possible. But in a larger city, with a larger sample, computer was necessary. Computer analysis was necessary. And she said, she wasn't able to do that, and maybe she could have, actually, she worked with some colleagues, and she could have asked her colleagues to do analyses for her. But this is a puzzle, for us, for second generation sociologists. Why didn't Mübeccel Kıray write the results of her second Ereğli research? Okay, now let me go into the other book, her research in a metropolitan city in Izmir. Let me very quickly, let me send this away already. I should have sent this before, but you see, sometimes I forget it. Now I am quickly doing this sharing. Let me go here and then find Kıray, this one. Okay, now the title of this book is İzmir, the örgütleşemeyen kent, unorganized city. Okay. Now, like in the first one, in this one too, there's a short introduction and methodology chapter. You know, the problematic and where are the data collected, and there are two main chapters actually after this introduction. Chapter 2 deals with 19th century Izmir, you know, central business district, economic and urban structure of Izmir until the First World War and the Great Fire. You know, fire while you know, the Turkish army entered into Izmir and the Greek army were leaving in that you know, in that chaos, let's say, there was this fire, and some neighborhoods were burned. But up to that point, what kind of Izmir there was and how it was organized, and then after the fire, how it is reorganized, and during the Republican time, and then in the chapter 3, she talked about that part of it, and especially the research is carried out in 1968, 67, 68, and written in 1972, published in 1972. So the present structure. Now, this is a research that's organized by Turkish Social Science Association. For some time, I was also a member of the executive committee of that association. And for example, with Nermin Avadan Una was the president of the association, and I was a member of the executive committee. But in 1967-68, I think Sherif Marden was and others together, they found a research fund to carry out research about, for example, Mübeccel Kıray has chosen the urban sociology of Izmir, or central business district of Izmir, business structure, occupational structure, industrial and non-industrial commercial structure of the city. Now, for example, Sherif Marden has chosen the religious identity, religion and secularism relationships. And there was another one on transportation networks. There was another one on social psychological aspects of this metropolitan city, etc., etc. Okay, now in this book, and especially in the second part and in the first part, she again uses data, historical data, and there is a rich data, because Izmir is one of, as you remember from our first semester and second semester, you know, we discussed how Izmir Railroad from Izmir to Aydın and to Denizli, you know, one of the first railroads which transformed Aegean region. Actually, it is how the British, or let's call a more general North European, Northwestern European center, you know, England, Holland, France, later Germany, you know, went to the third world countries like Ottoman Empire and peripheralization, remember, and how Izmir as a city is being peripheralized, dominated by capitalist commercial relations, by constructing this railway. And now Ottoman Empire constructed that so that the surplus in the hinterland of Izmir, from the figs, the wheats, to everything that are grown in the Aegean region, are collected in Izmir and taken out to the Europe with merchants, and merchants that are intermediaries of the merchants in Izmir, and their intermediaries into the towns and cities in the Aegean region. Now, she conceptualized Izmir from 19th century onward as a metropolitan network, a regional and sub-regional network, together with transportation, communication, and production relationships and commercial relationships, and how actually Izmir became a primary city. Primary city. All other towns and cities are so dependent on the main city, Izmir in this case, or in that region, that they cannot grow. They are dependent. They are dependent to Izmir center, but Izmir is dependent on London or Paris or northwestern European banks and etc. There are banks in Izmir, yes. There are merchants in Izmir. There are their agents in Izmir. She goes into this relationship in such detail that it's worth reading. I don't know whether there's an English translation of this book, but now here I have shown you the Turkish content of the book, and then she goes into a small. Now this duality. Let me send this away so that I will be face to face with you. Duality. On the one hand, especially during 20th century, in 50s and 60s, Now, there is, on the one hand, there's an organized industrial sector. With this import substitution, industrialization, etc., Izmir not anymore a private city, which is only an intermediary private city between northwestern Europe and the hinterland, Aegean region, whole Aegean region, even extending to some Marmara. Although of course, there is Istanbul as the metropolitan city. Now, as during 60s, 70s, there is already some planning organization. So there is an big industrial establishments. More than 25 workers working. Engineers, etc., in those establishments. Actually, before I went to Chicago for my MA and PhD, I went down to Izmir from Ankara, and I did some interviews for Mübeccel Kıray for this research, and I went into these industrial establishments, and I found, people there, how this establishment was founded, from where they found their capital, in which goods they produce, you know, the organization, etc., etc. So she continued with the help of other interviewers, in-depth interviews, but she also administered a questionnaire into all these commercial and industrial establishments. And she found out that there are, on the one hand, all this rationally organized modern sector with its transportation and communication networks. And then there is an informal sector of traders and smaller merchants and artisans and craftsmen. And hence, in 1962, 61, 62, she couldn't find a rational organized Ereğli, but in 1968, 68, 69, she couldn't find a rationally organized metropolitan city. Although it was a metropolitan city, Izmir, you know, with its large population and hinterland networks and all that, but there was this what is the percentage of industrial, something 20% of population is industrial sector, some 10-15% in agriculture, the rest are in services, and in small business. Now, informal sector. So this formal sector, informal sector, and informal sector being large, you know, informal sector in relationship to the formal sector, its largeness made Mübeccel Kıray to qualify Izmir as an unorganized metropolitan city, or a loosely organized, not yet a city, a metropolitan city which have not yet completed its integration, its differentiation, integration, and specialization process that a metropolitan city in that size should have. You see, from a normative point of view, she has an ideal model of metropolitan city, and to what extent Izmir is approaching to that normative model. And she's again disappointed that it is not enough rational, maximizing rational production and transportation and communication, and the networks are not rationally organized, whereas it could have been better, you know. Okay. Let me stop there and go to my research. Now, while Mübeccel Kıray did the Ereğli research, and in the time that I was a student in the second year and third year, she was doing her Adana research on the villages. Okay, I will not go into that. You will learn about it when you come to the fourth year. Now, for the first term, for the rural sociology, together with my friends, we did a study in 2 villages around Ankara. That's the second year and third year. But in the summer of now, in third year, it is published, as you know, under my name, Underdeveloped Capitalism and its Introduction into Villages, Az Gelişmiş Kapitalizm, Köylere Giriş. You can find the book in the internet. Okay, but after that book being published by the Students' Union of Middle East Technical University, we were courageous enough to go and ask our president, rector, to give us some money to do research this time in an industrial city, Kırıkkale, and a commercial agricultural town, Keskin, again together with my friends. And president gave us some 13,000 Turkish lira. 13,000 Turkish lira at that time was enough to take to find teachers and students in Kırıkkale and Keskin and give them some food and for their necessities, and do them administer our questionnaires in Kırıkkale and Keskin. Now, we administered something like 1,000 questionnaires in Kırıkkale and 100 questionnaires in Ereğli. And our model was Ereğli, of course, similar to Ereğli. And then during fourth year, we analyzed it for our papers in the fourth year. And later, when I went to Chicago, I had the data with me, and I wrote my MA thesis on that data. Now, unfortunately, this is the MA thesis, and this is 1971. We didn't have computers electronically saved. It is mechanical typewriters. So I have somebody, a student of mine, should scan this for me, maybe. But my PhD thesis is scanned. When I come to that, I will show the scanned version. Now, we analyzed on the basis of data how a state-sponsored industrial sector is established in Kırıkkale, starting 1920s, actually during maybe First World War and War of Independence. And then later it became makine kimya endüstrisi, machinery and chemistry industry complex, so there were something like 15,000 workers from Kırıkkale and Keskin working there. And then, a whole city of like around 40, 50,000. So a sample of 1,000, is not bad. So we tried to analyze central business district of Kırıkkale and Keskin, and we tried to analyze residential population and what kind of a stratification we can establish, whether independently of state factories, whether there was a private industrial sector which is in the process of industrialization, which will lead. There were some shops, some ateliers, workshops of repairing tractors and cars, etc. But we were looking for, a factory, a private factory, and if capitalism is going to develop in Turkey, in the city, we were expecting a private capital getting organized and producing cars or tractors or whatever, and they were not there. There was only state-sponsored factory, okay, there. So, this was underdeveloped capitalist industrialization, or we used kind of especially in Keskin, commercial involution. And so instead of an industrial revolution like in England and France and Japan, there was an agricultural and commercial involution like in Indonesia. Clifford Geertz was my professor when I was in Chicago, but this is before I went to Chicago, because there was two of our professors who are students of Clifford Geertz were teaching some courses to us in Middle East Technical University sociology department, and they were doing town studies, one of Michael Meeker, you know Michael Meeker, and Peter Benedict in Ula, in Muğla somewhere, so in Trabzon and Muğla, and Lloyd Fallers, my advisor for MA thesis, Lloyd Faller, who was doing a research in Edremit. So there were 3 town research being carried out, and as an example, there was an Ereğli research, and we were doing 5th one, kind of, in Kırıkkale and Keskin, and analyzing that. Now, I will not go into details of, you know, this is something, this is an MA thesis of something 200 pages, but at this point, I would like just share how this 1,000 people ranked different occupations, occupational groups or occupations in terms of prestige, in a kind of prestige stratification of occupations, occupational groups in terms of their prestige. So we gave these groups, like, for example, big industrialists. Now, are they with high prestige, medium prestige, or low prestige? That's what. So we gave each occupation or each strata, each group, and asked each one to rank into low, medium, and high prestige. So, for example, small industrial capitalists. Now, 1,000 people, 552 of them ranked small industrialists into the high category, and 384 of them into the medium category, for example. High bureaucrats of 1,000 people, 822 are ranking them as high or rating them as high. You know, it goes like that. Or industrial workers, only 35 people rated them as high, but majority industrial workers are rated as medium by 596 people out of 1,000. I can give also the percentages, but instead of percentages, we did something like this. We developed a score, a prestige score for each of the occupations. By, if it is low, 1 point; if it is medium, 2 points; if it is high, 3 points. So if, for example, for small industrialists, there were 600 high, ranking them as high, 3 times 600, and then 2 times 300, 1 time 100, and added them. So in terms of the scores and the stratification, ranking of the, now the big industrialists came first with something like 3,000, you know, the score. Next came landlords with 2,900, and next came in the third position high bureaucrats with 2,800, and then merchants with 2,700, and professionals, serbest meslek, with 2,400, 2,500, small industrialists with 2,300, petty bureaucrats 2,200, industrial workers 1,700, craftsmen 1,500, agricultural worker 1,400, small landowner or small landowning peasant also 1,000. So the lowest is 1,400, highest is 3,000, and this is the ranking. I will not go into it further, but now I have to go into my PhD thesis,